This Week in Pediatric Oncology, the podcast exploring hot topics and exciting advances in childhood cancer. TWiPO is produced by Solving Kids Cancer, nonprofits located in New York and London dedicated to improving research and supporting families, because every kid deserves to grow up. Subscribe to TWiPO through your favorite podcast platform.
This Week in Pediatric Oncology, the podcast about new advances for childhood cancer. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 87, recorded on whatever day it is today, June 23rd. I'm your co-host, Tim Cripe from Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, affiliated with The Ohio State University. And I have with me here my co-host, Brenda Weigel from the University of Minnesota. Welcome, Brenda.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks for being here. And we have two great, well-known guests with us today to discuss our topic. The first guest is Dr. Andy Pearson, former professor of pediatric oncology from the University of Newcastle upon Tyne and founding chair of PSYOP Neuroblastoma Committee, and a long and illustrious career in neuroblastoma research. Welcome, Andy.
Welcome. Thank you very much indeed for inviting me.
Yes, thank you for being here. And the other guest is Dr. Lou Chesler, who's an honorary consultant in medical oncology at the Royal Marsden and a researcher at the Institute for Cancer Research, and spent a lot of time in the U.S. In training and at Northwestern and the NCI and UCSF as a pediatric oncologist. So he's a worldly scientist. Welcome, Lou.
Thank you for inviting me. Nice to talk to you all.
Yes, thank you both for being here. So today we wanted to talk about the Accelerate forums, which we introduced in a general conversation a couple podcasts ago, I believe 84, 85, something like that. So if you haven't listened to that one, please watch that and you'll get a general idea of these Accelerate conferences. And we wanted to talk about those again, specifically about the ones that you guys played the most major role in, I believe, the ALK one. But before we get into those details, can you both tell us a bit about your background and how you got led to these Accelerate conferences and what your thoughts are about them in general? Andy, let's start with you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've worked in some pediatric oncology until I retired from the Institute of Cancer Research and Royal Marsden Global Health for over 40 years. And the key element of Accelerate, which is something that I've really become particularly involved in, even more involved in since I retired, is the multi-stakeholder equal partner concept. So for Accelerate, the Accelerate is to accelerate drug development for children and adolescents with cancer, and it identifies issues and proposes solutions. And it's a global organization. We've got very strong links, Europe and the US. And over the last few months, we are getting increasingly strong links with Australia, Canada, and Japan. And the basic premise of Accelerate is that patient advocates, physicians, regulators, and industry are equal partners. And I think that is how we've been able to drive the agenda. And currently, we've had 7 pediatric strategy forums. The very first one was on ALK, and the 6th one was on ALK inhibition again. The 7th one, which we've just held, was on CAR T cells. And these have become increasingly international, increasingly established in kind of the calendar for children's cancer. But I think the key element is equal partners is the main ethos of the forums.
Have you had a difficult time getting people to participate and or get all the logistics? And are you doing it now virtually? Or has it slowed down at all with COVID?
No, I mean, right. So, I mean, the very first forum, which actually Lou was at, and he spoke at the first and the 6th, was on ALK inhibition. And when I organized that was difficult to engage all the partners. But I think what has been very reassuring as the forums have evolved is that more and more people want to be involved. We are halfway through an assessment of the impact of the forums. We've sent questionnaires out to all industry and to academia who have been involved. And the 78% have found that the forums have actually altered their practice. And we generally find that once a company comes to the forum, they subsequently come to other forums. And with the CAR T-cell forum, we were able to engage quite a number of new biotech companies, including China and Singapore, as well as those in the US. So I think that it is an event that's becoming increasingly attractive. I mean, before COVID, our strategy was to have one hosted in Europe at the EMA and one hosted in the States. And we had one in Philadelphia. And then with COVID, we initially paused because we thought the forums needed some face-to-face interaction. But then, because COVID endemic has been on so long, we've converted to virtual. And we have had 3 virtual forums now, and we're planning the 4th virtual forum on tyrosine kinase inhibitors and sarcoma in November. And then our plan is to go back to face-to-face next year, and we're aiming to do 3 forums next year, 2 face-to-face and 1 virtual. And I mean, at the last CAR T-cell forum, we had 246 participants, and from all stakeholder groups. I think the smallest group was patient advocates, and there were about 40 of those. So I think really we managed to engage people, and I think, like every bad event in life, the endemic has actually allowed us to go virtual, and that's probably allowed us to introduce the forum to a bigger group.
Andy, can you expand on sort of how the topics are picked for the forums and how you landed on choosing ALK for the very first one? Can you tell folks about that process and how the topics are chosen?
Yeah, I mean, like so many things in life, that we become more formalized as time has evolved. And I'll say where we are now, and I'll discuss ALK. So the current process is we ask academics, patient advocates, industry and regulators once a year in the fall what topics they want to be discussed in the forum. Last time we had 52 topics. We then select 6 or 7 of those, and then we, at the Accelerate conference, we vote. And the most popular topics are the ones we take forward. So we try to have a very democratic and open process now. ALK we chose because it was an area where there was a lot of science, that there was a relatively small patient group. There were a number of ALK inhibitors, and the number of ALK inhibitors exceeded really the patients that could be properly evaluated. And also the concept was that one ALK inhibitor would probably is not appropriate for all types of disease, because within ALK there are different molecular drivers. So those are some of the reasons we chose ALK, because it was a relatively small and defined topic, and even then it had a lot of challenges, but those are the key issues.
Lou, as one of the inaugural presenters at the first forum on ALK, and really a leading expert in the field for targeting NMIC and the oncogenic driver. When you experienced that first Accelerate forum, what do you feel are sort of some of the key impactful findings of that very first one? And do you think, or how do you think that influenced the field?
I like most things have in pediatric oncology been led by Andy more than once towards this kind of initiative, and sometimes, because he looks beyond the horizon, it's not really clear what the goals are or the output will be. But for Accelerate, I think they really have been substantial and they do affect the way people like myself who work in the lab and in the hospital get the clinical trials into conduct, how that works. And I think it's so critical that it brings everybody together. And in pediatric oncology, we have so many challenges to just get a hold of these drugs, even for targets in the cancers of interest that we have that are well characterized, and there's a lot of biology. It's difficult to engage with companies. I used to joke that when I'd go to AACR and visit the booths, the drug reps would see me coming and they'd run the other way, which is a significant problem. So just engaging with them so that they understand who the stakeholders are, who's generating the research, what the clinical trial concepts are coming from academia and from the hospitals, incredibly important, because then, it leads to this is the way that projects are designed and everybody gets together and ideas are generated. And more importantly, these conferences were a way of, ALK was one of the first situations where we potentially, we had many drugs attacking a single target, and we'd never been in that situation before. And so it provided a means to, for these companies to work together with us to prioritize the clinical use of these drugs. And that, that's so important, where you have multiple cooperative groups who all wish to run trials, and some sense of coordination, a way of prioritizing those is really important, so that patients have options to be treated. So, all of these things in one form or the other have been outputs of ALKiPediatric.
So that's really good to hear. Obviously, we've all been faced with lots of challenges with working with industry and getting drugs to move to the clinic. Was it key to have sort of the global presence there? What were some of the key elements like that you thought were most important at that conference?
I think, just getting the kind of key people in an area of biology or clinical medicine together with the key companies that have drugs is really important. That doesn't happen very often. We represent such small patient populations, even if we're at a big hospital. That kind of landscape is fragmented. So this, just the fact that you're brought together and these people meet you face to face and you meet all the leads in these companies does a lot to accelerate the research. Even getting, MTAs, material transfer authorizations from these companies sometimes to study these drugs in the research setting and develop the preclinical data is very difficult. Just to navigate these companies and understand how they're structured, they're enormous. I think ALKiPediatric, if it has one output, it's to put these people together, and that generates research, and it generates clinical trial proposals, and that's just fantastic.
I think there has to be, I think everyone agrees there has to be prioritization. Just giving two examples from ALK. ALK, as you know, ALK Fusion has a clear role in certain infants and babies with high-grade glioma. And it's been estimated that in the region of about 40 patients a year in the US and Europe have this fusion. And there are in the region of 7 ALK inhibitors at the moment. And if each of those companies that had an ALK inhibitor initiated a trial, you would be recruiting 3 patients per trial, and you wouldn't learn anything. So I think that there needs to be kind of coordination, and there was a consensus that that one ALK inhibitor should be evaluated first in this group of patients, and then others if there was a unmet need. And with neuroblastoma, again, lorlatinib was highlighted as the agent that needed to be evaluated, different from the best ALK inhibitor for CNS tumors. And the Titan trial that SKC and many other partners have funded has greatly allowed transatlantic coordination to evaluate lorlatinib in neuroblastoma. So I think that unless there is coordination, unfortunately, groups won't, children won't benefit, academia and industry, won't learn. This is, I think, one of the roles of the forum, to kind of facilitate a consensus of prioritization.
Could I just add, as I think that really was quite a surprise and finding for me. You're often skeptical about some of these conferences, and it was very clear the first conference at Accelerate that I attended, that this was the first place I'd ever seen multiple pharma companies who usually are somewhat competitive with each other on targets like ALK, presenting fairly detailed data on these clinical drugs aligned to each other. I've never seen that kind of disclosure sort of in one conference, and it makes it very easy to understand the strengths and benefits of the particular drugs and the differences between them, and then really to think in an organized way about how they should be prioritized and in what indications. And that's a real contribution, I think.
I think it really speaks to the uniqueness of Accelerate, that stakeholders in academia and in industry are willing to share that information in a confidential way and in a trusting way that moves the field. And I think, as Andy just illustrated, when we're dealing with such small populations, that's critical. And knowing that work came out of that very first Accelerate, what led into the decision to do a second meeting on ALK, and what was the goal of that? What were the intentions of bringing the same topic back, and what were you hoping to learn from that, and what do you think was additionally gained from that second meeting? And Andy, I'll start with you on that one.
No, I mean, it was very much, we wanted to review the landscape and see what the remaining unmet needs were, and really what lessons had been learned, and what was very positive was that there had been regulatory approvals or submissions for ALK inhibitors in the US and in Europe, which was did not happen in 2017. And we understood the unmet needs, very clearly in the different groups of patients. What was required? There was still a need for more coordination in IMT, and we know that molecular diagnostics is absolutely essential in that group. We know that the early generation ALK inhibitors really have to be fully evaluated in anaplastic large cell lymphoma, neuroblastoma, as I mentioned, and the importance in CNS tumors. So we really set the vision, the strategy for the next few years by doing that. And the concept that we're trying to take forward with the forums are, the prioritization is reliable the day of the forum. And we want to set forward some kind of living prioritization. And we've achieved that in terms of mature B cells, because there's a group of experts that are now running an international trial who can give expertise opinion to industry that this particular compound is applicable or not. We've done the same for acute myeloid leukemia through the LLS TWiPO initiative. And for ALK, we wanted to do the same. We wanted to update it and give what is the current view. And there's so many lessons that we have learned. Persistently, kind of the early involvement of regulators, the early involvement of cooperative groups, this idea of focused and sequential development. So when you've got a lot of drugs, but a small patient population, you've got to choose one. So these are all kind of evolving themes, which have been really strongly supported by reviewing what's happened with ALK over the last 5 years.
It really sounds like you have made a lot of use of these conferences. I mean, my fear was always that all talk, no action, but it sounds like there's been a lot of, well, you convinced me that it's been a lot of great outcomes from these. Lou, how has it affected sort of what you're studying or what you're wanting to do? And from what Andy just described, it's not just neuroblastoma, ALK. It's all aspects. So you need various other partners and stakeholders there across experts in different diseases. How has that impacted sort of what you're prioritizing for your own research or your own trials?
I mean, it's helped us create a framework, I think, again, because, by the time the second ALK forum came around, some trials had already opened, alectinib and ceritinib and, crizotinib plus temsirolimus, and, crossing different diagnoses, so AL, CL, and neuroblastoma. These are people who don't usually attend the same conferences. And so you might be unaware of the kind of global picture about how these trials are proceeding. And, just the ability to coordinate those and, again, to be connected with pharma and with other groups doing the research and other clinicians. I'm sure that some of the initiatives that are going forward now, which, I'm just so thrilled about, having moved from the US to the UK, I think it's incredibly important to run trials in coordinated fashion across borders, between the United States and the EU and elsewhere in the world to access, a large patient base. And if we do that, we learn faster. And that requires a huge amount of engagement and coordination. I think that's what the conferences do. I think that we have a lot more engagement now between Children's Oncology Group, between, NAMT, SIAPEN, and the other groups, ITCC in Europe. I don't know if it's a direct output. It probably is, the combined upfront evaluation of lorlatinib and induction therapy in neuroblastoma, which is being looked at by the Children's Oncology Group and by SIAPEN, is an enormous initiative and really a win, I think. It has many coordinated aspects. The biomarker work is all coordinated. The clinical trial is coordinated, funded by, Solving Kids Cancer. I think that's just a fantastic output from that kind of meeting, driven either wholly or in part by that kind of meeting. And it's changed the ethos, I think, a bit more from competition to coordination and cooperation.
I want to kind of re-emphasize, the catalytic power of the patient advocates in terms of solving kids' cancer, and it's not solving kids' cancer only that funded TWiPO, but they managed to, they have a consortium of 7 charities, Band of Parents, Jack, One and Thompson Foundation, SKC UK, US, Zoe for Life, and Wade's Army, which I think involved about 2 continents and about 4 different countries. And I think that it's almost the clinical work and the scientific work which Lou says we're working together, which we need to because of the patient number, but that is backed up by the funding, which is such a nice achievement.
Andy, thank you for highlighting the advocates, and certainly they are part of the key stakeholders as well of the forums and a huge player. So thank you for that. One of the other key, I think, outputs has been the commitment to publish almost, if you will, a white paper from each of the forums. How impactful do you think that's been? How many have you successfully published the outcome of each of the forums, and is that something that you can point to as pivotal as well?
Apart from the very first forum we published on the website, but the 6th forum, we're publishing the results of the 1st and the 6th. So we've published them all, and we're very grateful to European Journal of Cancer, who critically reviews them all in that. And so that, as Tim said, what we didn't want is for them to be meetings and discussions with no output. So we've published them all, and we are working to reducing the time from the forum to publication. It's currently at 7 months, and we're trying to beat that for the ALK forum to 4 or 5 months. But the other key thing is, what do people do with the publications? And we, again, the FDA and EM are working with us. And we know that actually in B-cell, mature B-cell malignancy circuits, that industry have responded enormously, so that they have waived development of those type of compounds that the forum felt were not valuable, and prioritized those compounds that the forum did feel valuable, so the ADCs and CAR T cells. So we've got that very clear. We did a form of checkpoint inhibitors, and the conclusion was we didn't need to do any more studies globally of single agent checkpoint inhibitors. And again, the FDA and EMA have shown that the number of trials reduced after that and went for combination. So I think that, that I think is kind of the real output of the forum, that actually will alter the way that drugs are developed by industry and by academia.
That sounds great. How many do you have planned in the future, and what are some of the upcoming topics, and how could our listeners get in on them or find out about them?
Yeah, the next one is tyrosine kinase inhibitors in bone sarcomas, which we have focused on bone sarcomas, and hopefully that'll be proof of concept, for the bigger population of sarcomas. And that's on the 30th of November, 1st of December. That's going to be virtual, and the advert is being advertised today actually for that. And then in 2022, we're going to, on the 28th and 29th of March, have hopefully the first physical forum at the new EMA buildings in Amsterdam. Then a virtual, and that'll probably be on BRAF and MEK inhibitors. The Oversight Committee has got to make the final decision on that. And then as a result of the survey that we'll undertake in the autumn, we'll have a virtual forum in either June or early September, and then a physical one somewhere in the US in the fall next year. And the topic again will be decided by what the stakeholders wish.
So thank you. I think we're coming up on our time. I will ask if Dr. Cripe has any additional questions, and also any final thoughts from Lou or Andy on the importance of the Accelerate forums.
I have no more questions, Your Honor.
I want to thank you for highlighting the forums, through today in oncology. Yes.
And thank you. I want to say it looks like that's it for this week for the 87th podcast. And thank you to Drs. Andy Pearson and Lou Chesler, as well as my co-host, Dr. Tim Cripe, for another outstanding conversation, and really highlighting the importance of international collaboration across multidisciplines and multi-stakeholders through the Accelerate forums, and how this collaboration really does change the face of pediatric cancer care and research. And so thank you for that. Thanks to the team at Solving Kids Cancer, a nonprofit charity dedicated to improving survival through creating novel treatment options for children. Remember, the more we learn, communicate, share ideas, and work together, the faster we'll reach the day when all childhood cancer is preventable or curable. As always, keep up the fight, and thanks for listening to This Week in Pediatric Oncology.
We welcome your comments, questions, or thoughts on topics for future episodes. Just drop us a note at TWiPO@solvingkidscancer.org. You can follow Dr. Cripe on Twitter at KidsOncDoc, send an email to Dr. Weigel at weige007@umn.edu, and find all TWiPO episodes at solvingkidscancer.org.